Do this. So we're excited to welcome Jerry back for what is his third year presenting. He's presenting once this morning and I believe once later on in the symposium, so I will turn it over to you. This will count you down, so when it gets to zero, it shouldn't be bad, you better.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Jerry Reynolds. I'm from Louisiana State University, and this is my third year at the conference, and I'm a third-year doc student at LSU. Really today, what I wanted to talk to everybody about is, in short, I actually just wrote a paper in our journal, the CSR Island Journal, and I wanted to kind of just challenge everybody today to start thinking about, number one, social work and sport is a forgotten legacy. And if you think about, I guess what actually got me started on this whole thing was, I saw a quote in one of my textbooks in my PhD program, and it said, Jane Addams thought that baseball was such a powerful institution, it really, she thought it was great. Well, I kept digging, and I kept digging, and I kept digging, and kept digging. And 2 years later, basically, in short, I found that there is this rich history that is not documented in social work. It's documented in sports history. It's documented in sociology. It's documented in other lines of history. I mean, it's just documented everywhere else except, unfortunately, social work. So today what I wanted to go over briefly with you is really what I like to call Jane Addams' forgotten legacy, social recreation and sport. And really, there's three main themes. The first thing is, at the top here on my slide, you have Hull House Maps and Papers, which was, that's a lot of Jane Addams' fundamental work. She was a community planner. She was trying to find out where the problems were in her community and how she could map it and know where different groups of people were. And in her community that had a lot of needs. Well, when the big wave of immigrants came to the United States, there was about, from 1880 to about 1920, we averaged about 1 million immigrants a year coming into this country. And in Chicago, where she worked in particular, there were about 18 major ethnic groups that came to her neighborhood, ranging from Greek, Italian, Irish, you name it. And one of the ways that she brought people together was by creating Hull House in a physical space where especially youth were able to come together and have a place to go, because they had two options. They worked, they were on the streets, or they were at Hull. The third option was that they could be at Hull House, learning and growing and developing and changing. And out of that evolved a lot of very historic programs that I'm going to talk to you all about what she did. And just kind of give you an overwhelming sense of, these are some pictures from the original Hull House playground, which was built in 1895. If you look at I encourage you to look at the Chicago Tribune and just Google, look at Hull House Playground, and you will find some amazing stories and just things. But this is one example. In her community, she had about 70,000 community members who were marginalized and largely unwelcome. They were not welcomed by most people. So where does social work enter the equation? We work with the marginalized, we work with the unwelcome. And really her goals in getting sports programs and recreation programs up and running were first to acculturate young people, to help them learn a new way of life and to learn the American way of life. Also to give them a form of childhood, which in most cases, comes from play. So she wanted to give children that sense of play that would help them grow and develop appropriately and change and become productive adults. And so this is just another picture from the Hull House playground, which shows just some examples of, you can notice just from looking at it, the different groups of children, ethnically and racially, that are in the picture as well. Now, I won't say that this also the playground also served as a source of turf wars. The Irish and the Italian children were known to squabble. It's also well documented that Jewish children were also not very much allowed to attend the playground and participate in sports because their parents felt that it took them away from religion. It took them away from their studies. And also in Greek culture, one of the greatest things that Jane Addams did was that she brought wrestling to Hull House. And that was actually, for them, was actually a form of preparation to keep them connected to the old country. But also, she allowed my military drill to happen, and that was actually, a lot of the Greek children thought they were going to go back to war against Turkey, and they would be ready for it. So it's kind of interesting how a lot of people don't think, she was anti-war, but at the same time, she was a part of a military drill because she was able to bring in Greek children. And really, this is a picture from a young program from the Hull House Boys Club, which had about 1,500 young men that participated on Saturdays in what would more, rather than just recreation, Hull House was actually a source of athletic competition. If you look through all kinds of papers, Hull House played indoor baseball, they played basketball. They also were very much focused on physical fitness. They did work on truancy. There was programs that she sponsored about how to use sports as a way to relieve truancy. She actually also brought in some homeless youth, and created a boxing program as a way to help these young men get off the streets as well. So there's a really long, well-documented history of what she did, especially with creating a sense of belonging, creating that sense of competition. They would create against other settlement houses throughout the community. And this is the Hull House women's basketball team from 1907 picture. Notice the hair and the uniforms, quite different from today. But for them, this was a sense, being part of a team was also a sense of empowerment for these young women, and also for young men. Dr. James Naismith, also the founder of American basketball, noted in some of the literature that Hull House was known for its basketball programs because of what he called its magnetic appeal and its ability to keep young people off the street. So it's very well documented even in basketball history that social work had a role in empowering young women. And basically my point, what I want to say is that overall, is that Jane Addams' work went beyond the gym. It wasn't just serving people, it wasn't creating physical spaces for young people to come. It was also, if you look back at the University of Chicago bulletin from 1918 for the School of Social Work, there was actually a specialization in recreational programming and social work. So what they used to do was, if you could take courses there about essentially like today what you would take almost as a coach, and it would teach you how to teach gymnastics, how to teach a different sport, things like that. You can go back and look at the bulletins from those years, and you can actually see that coaching actually was part of social work in the Jane Addams tradition. And also too, one of the things that is really known is one of her longtime workers, Rosemary Giles, she actually, in about 1915, as the young people and immigrants started to move up economically and pushed out to the suburbs, she actually took those sports programs and followed them out into the suburbs, and actually started high school athletic programs, not just for women, but for men as well, in the suburbs of Chicago. So it wasn't, and she worked in the public school system in Morton for about 30 years, but she actually still lived and taught at Hull House. So she lived there, she had a presence, and there was a connection, and social work has been, for a very long time, engaged in sport. And arguably, I would say that our first athletic director was Jane Addams. That's my whole argument. So, but really, what I want, this is actually the second year that I've kind of kicked off this conference. And I talked to you a lot today about Jane Addams' forgotten legacy. And really, I've given you a lot of evidence to show that she had a forgotten legacy. And this was something that somehow just got pushed out of social work history. I want you all to, in my strength-based approach, I want you all to think about how will we be remembered? How will we be remembered for what we've done in sport? How will we be remembered? Are we going to carry out her legacy whether it's in a community-based setting, a youth sports setting, a professional sports setting, a college setting, in a policy level, etc. Because another reason we have a lot of the parks that we do in the United States was because Jane Addams got together with some other folks that were very interested in the well-being of children and created parks and sparked the National Playground Movement. So today, every time you see a playground in the United States or a recreation department, think of Jane Addams, because that is, just remember that you're involved in what she did, but also that is also part of her legacy. Thank you.
So while we get Lindsay's presentation set up, Jerry is happy to answer any questions that you might have for him while he's standing here. So if you got questions for Jerry, shoot them up here.
Yes.
I missed that comment on, you said during the program catalog of the early social program had coaching, or I kind of blinked out on that part.
Oh, yeah.
In the curriculum.
Yes. It wasn't officially labeled coaching.
Okay.
University of Chicago
Okay.
School of Social Work. If you look back at their bulletins from 1918, 1919,
Okay.
they actually had working with children, classes on working with children in recreation, like a recreation program specialty.
Okay. That was,
And really, it's really interesting because you'll say a part of that specialty was essentially like, we're going to teach, you could be a social worker, and yet you were taking a class on how to teach gymnastics, or how to teach basketball, or something along those lines.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Any other questions for Jerry? You nailed it, man.
Thank you.
You did it. I'll mention this during one of our next intermission. We couldn't share all of our exciting news all up the front. We had to spread it out the other day. But Jerry's got a great article that was just published in our special issue for the Journal of Issues in Intercollegiate Athletics. It also talks about the forgotten history and the role that early social workers played in sort of creating this sports social work movement. So all of you should make sure that you check out that article. It's a fantastic read filled with really good history and frames sort of some of the similar sentiments that we share as a collective group today. So we'll move on to our second presenter. So this is Lindsay Sanders, University of North Carolina at Greensboro, also with the Institute to Promote Athlete Health and Wellness. So Lindsay was at our second symposium, did a phenomenal job presenting to us in Atlanta, has come back, is also really active within our entire Alliance organization and structure. So we are thrilled to have her. We're even more thrilled in 3 semesters when she finishes defending that dissertation and can become Dr. Lindsay Sanders and pick up that very exciting title and go on to achieve even greater things that she's already able to achieve right now. So Lindsay, we'll turn it over to you. Have at it. And I'll get this set up and it'll count you down for you.
And I'm going to use this because my voice doesn't carry.
You guys heard it on Lindsay.
See? At least you heard that. Is that better?
Yeah.
So, as Matt said, my name is Lindsay Sanders, and I'm a third-year PhD student at UNC Greensboro. Getting my PhD in public health, however, I definitely identify as a social worker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of North Carolina, and I'm working a little bit with the student athletes at UNCG while I'm also working on my PhD. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit today about some preliminary work that I'm doing for my dissertation surrounding the culture of caring in college athletics. Hopefully you all have some idea of what that might mean, but I'm hoping that by the end of my 11 minutes and 27 seconds that you'll know a little bit more. So if we can start just by everybody standing up. Now, if you've ever seen a coach communicate with his players, his or her players, like this, how does it go?
I was standing already.
So, as I unfortunately expected, everyone sat down. And that's something that I'm really interested in. Why is this what we think of when we think of coaching? This summer, I was given funding to do an extensive literature review, which, like I said, kicked off my dissertation research. And what I looked at was the culture of caring and the theory of care-seeking behavior in college athletics. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot out there. I found less than 50 publications that were on this subject, and the majority of them were about nursing. There is a theory of care-seeking behavior that was published about 20 years ago. However, it talks specifically about nursing and really about cancer patients. However, as most people in this room are aware, the literature was consistent that about 1 in 4 young adults do have a mental illness. That means on any given NCAA basketball team, there's about 2 to 3 players. And on any given NCAA football team, there's about 9 or 10. Crazy, right? Even crazier is that 70% of them never tell anybody, never seek help, never do anything about it. And that's really what we're here for, I know, is to learn a little bit more about how to work with these students. The publications that I looked at said that pretty much, generally speaking, the barriers for treatment for athletes and non-athletes are the same. However, athletes sometimes have a little bit less of an attitude, and they are fighting a higher stigma surrounding mental illness, and that's one of the reasons why they don't seek treatment. Additionally, although just mental health cases in general, people are usually worried, who's going to find out, who's going to know, which of course feeds into the stigma. Athletes are really worried about this. And the research shows that they especially worry about their coach finding out. Will this mean less than playing time? Will I lose my place on the team? Will it show that I'm weak? Will people think that I can't handle the pressure of being a student athlete? So my research is really a call to athletic administrators and coaches to change that, to use their position, to give athletes the strength to say, hey, I need help. And specifically in this conference, it's my call to you guys to do the same thing. As I said to begin with, my research, or what I really looked at, was culture of caring and care-seeking behavior, which it sounds similar, but it's really 2 very different things, because the culture of caring puts all the emphasis on the athletic department or on coaches. That's where, when we're talking about the culture of caring, that's where we can work with the administrators and the coaches on how to nurture, how to educate themselves, how to be there for the student athletes. Versus care-seeking behaviors really puts that onus on the student athletes. As a social worker, we all know which one we'd rather have. We'd rather have the supportive system rather than putting everything on the student athletes. So, which face would you rather see? The ones that I showed in the beginning, where all that communication is just directive communication, it's focused on winning. That's where you might hear the suck it up, don't be a wuss, those kind of statements when somebody says, hey coach, I need some help. Or would you rather work with coaches who have this kind of attitude, who say, I'm here for you. What is it that I can do for you? My assumption is, these are the coaches we want to work with. But my challenge is, we can change the first kind of coach into this kind of coach. As Jerry mentioned, strengths-based approaches are what social workers are known for. Even the coaches who look angry, even these guys, and I'm a Tar Heel, so to say that Mike Krzyzewski can give strengths-based approaches is huge. But I think even he can change from this attitude and this approach to dealing with his student athletes to this. And they can do that with our help. So like I said, my call to you as social workers is to look more into that theory of care seeking and culture of caring. Do some work yourselves. Trust me, there needs to be some publications, there needs to be some research surrounding these. Get out there, do the work, but also change Mike Krzyzewski into this.
Questions for Lindsay? me ask a question. I got difficult ones, so somebody else out there has to have one. There we go, right there.
Hi. I was just wondering, did you look into, within your literature search, some of the ways or interventions that had been around creating a culture of caring, and what seems to be either out there or used or not, or what might be some best practices that you saw?
Well, as I said, most of the literature that's out there, and when I say most, virtually all, is in the field of nursing. So some of the things that they recommend are really specific to nursing practices. Yes, is the short answer to your question, but how that translates into what we do kind of takes some manipulation and some time, which is what I hope to work on, is putting something out there that says, hey, as the clinical intervention specialist, this is how you can use the culture of caring. I don't know, I could go into the nursing
No,
suggestions.
that's okay. I
But
just
yeah,
wondered,
there are specific techniques and things that are said about what to do in the field of nursing, but virtually nothing else.
I don't want to dominate. Did you look into sports psychology literature at all?
Yes.
Okay.
They use a different theoretical approach, as I'm sure most of you know, than social workers. So there wasn't much about the culture of caring, unfortunately, in their literature. They talk more about the care-seeking behaviors. Yeah.
I know that you're in the literature review stage of the process, but I'm just curious if you've done any like exploration with the athletic department at your university, and what the receptivity has been like among people that you may have talked to. I'm just curious about any experiences that you've had.
Well, since my advisor is in the room, I'm not in that phase of my dissertation yet. But unofficially, we have done a little bit of exploration, some interviews. Some of the other projects that we're working on at the Institute, which Matt introduced me to being at the Institute to promote athlete health and wellness. Some of the other projects that we're working on look at that, interviewing coaches, interviewing athletic administrators. And so yes, there is a little bit out there, and we're hoping to grow that knowledge base.
Hi, will you consider looking at coaches that you perceive have more nurturing attitudes and behaviors toward their players and athletes? I'm thinking of Tony Dungy, who people said that he didn't raise his voice, yell and scream at his players. So I'm just curious how you are going to perceive or analogize some of those behaviors that you're indicating are inappropriate.
He is absolutely an excellent example. Unfortunately, we have more bad examples than we do examples like him. So yes, I would love to look at the qualities that he has and see what other coaches I can find that have the success off the field that he has had. I think
On the field, he's had success on the field. He's a champion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which of course, most coaches, their whole thing is winning. And we want them to win, but we also want them to treat their athletes well. And that's one of the things that I want to do eventually with my research is develop some type of tool that assesses those behaviors. So I haven't quite gotten there yet, but that's a goal of mine. Yeah.
What do you think the biggest barrier is right now for coaches not shifting attention to some of these positive behaviors?
My mind went two different places with that. The first thing is that their focus is on winning. They don't care about anything else. As long as they're getting the W, they don't really care.
So let me ask follow-up to that. So and there probably isn't, but this would be a great study thinking long-term. Is there literature out there that illustrates, besides examples like we know with Tony Dungy, that behaviors like this actually impact in positive directions and competitive outcomes?
Yes. Professor Moore.
Are there very few of them, I'm assuming?
I feel like I'm not knowledgeable enough to say the number of them. I have read some just in alignment with some of our other research, so I know there's some out there. My guess would be that it would be kind of like the culture of caring where there's not a lot. Just because in our work we are finding that it's hard to transition. We look at transactional coaching versus transformational coaching. Transactional being really focusing on the win, focusing on playing time, and transformational coaching transformational coaching being more about the relationship that you build. And we're finding that, you know, as I said with the young lady in the back, that most of the coaches just focus on winning. And so my assumption would be that there's not a good out there.
Do you, will you be looking to see if there's a difference between like the NCAA pressures on those coaches and their training compared to like the NAIA's coaching standards? And
Yes. In fact, I also want to look at the difference between professional sports and college sports. Again, my guess is that the higher up you go, the more the focus is going to be on winning and less about relationship building, which might suggest that the NCAA might be a little bit more than any other organizations.
I think one more question and then we'll move on.
I was just gonna recommend, yeah, looking at the administration and things like that too. I think I do a lot of work with coaches. It's really easy to say coaches only care about winning, but that's because that's what their job is based on. So also looking at that bigger culture of administration and what other pressures are being put on them to win. And I actually think at professional sports, sometimes they don't actually have that same level of pressure in some ways because